Like Isabel mentioned, my name is Nikki and I am going to be one of your hosts today. I am an outreach and intervention specialist, or you can think of me as a case manager. And I'll share a bit about our program in this presentation. In a bit, we will be joined also by our clinical staff, Alicia Kim, who has a master's in social work and will be here to help answer some of your more specific questions about living with students and helping support students that may have anxiety or depression. But before we get started, I just want to drop a link in the chat right now. This is a demographic survey that we asked all of our participants to just do if possible. If you're not comfortable putting your full name, you can put your initials, and any of the questions you can decline to state. What's most important for us is that zip code. So please take a second to fill this out and put your zip code. What this does is allows us to take some information about what communities we serve so that we're able to tailor our services more to accommodate for the different needs of each community that we are seeing we serve the most. But with that, I'm going to start our presentation. Feel free to do the survey as I'm speaking, as I will have a bit of an introduction. So you are here today for the workshop, Anxiety and Depression in Successful People. This was developed by myself and Alicia Kim in collaboration with Grace Lee and Lynn Shim from one of our other OCAPICA departments. And we're here really just to talk about how you can notice if your high achieving student, your successful student, may be living with anxiety or depression. It's really difficult for us to notice these things when people are, functioning at what we would call a high level capacity, right? If your student has amazing grades, doesn't seem like they are, if it doesn't seem like they are, suffering from anything outwardly, it may be hard for us to notice this. So we're going to go over some signs and symptoms that successful people in particular exhibit when they do have anxiety and depression, and also talk about how you can support someone who may be living with either of these illnesses. Now, we will have time for questions at the end, but I also have some questions built in here. So if you want to participate, I encourage you to use the chat box to send in some responses. Other questions we will save time for at the end. But before we jump into the presentation, I did want to give you a quick overview of the OCAPICA Well Necessity Program. So we are a completely state-funded mental health program. What that means is we are funded by the Mental Health Services Act, and so all of our program services are completely free. And so the different services we provide are workshops like the one that you're at today. We have short-term, which is about 12 weeks of case management, which is connecting you to resources or helping you develop skills in order to remove stressors from all the outside things that are affecting you so you can focus on your own wellness. Or we also do counseling services, which you may think of as therapy. And that is helping you process what you're going through. We can do that with couples, with whole families, with individuals. And all of our services, again, are free. You do not have to have any particular insurance. We actually don't ask for you to have an insurance. We serve all different ages, from kids as young as like 2 or 3 years old to older adults that are in their 80s, 90s. And so all different demographics here. We do serve North and South Orange County. So if you are living in Anaheim or one of its surrounding cities, you likely fall within our region of service. And so you should be able to enroll in our programs. And so if you're interested in enrolling, you can visit our website at ocapica.org, or you can call our phone number here. It's a toll-free line. So I'll give it a second in case you want to take a picture or a screenshot of this. But it's a great resource for an introduction to mental health, or if you're looking for therapy and don't really know where to start, we're a great place for you or your students or people that you might know. All right. So my first question for you here is, what do you picture when you think of someone who is struggling with anxiety or depression? And there's no right or wrong answers here. Please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, so I'm getting some answers. We have a sad person, trouble accomplishing, somebody who is tired, has no motivation, is always worried. Yeah, so these are great responses, right? These are typical things, quiet, yeah. Typical things that we think of when we hear anxiety, depression, right? Motivation, depression is specifically linked to motivation. Sadness, panicked is a great one, right? Having those strong emotions, acting out, exactly. They're all describing really great indicators that we typically look towards when somebody has depression or anxiety. Something that is important to note is that sometimes that motivation can shift, right? Maybe they don't have motivation for themselves, but they want to upkeep appearances. Or maybe they want to make sure nobody knows that they're sad, nobody knows that they're worried. And so that's why we have a difficulty noticing when somebody who is successful, right, who does achieve a lot, who does, meet deadlines, that's when it's difficult for us to really notice that they are struggling with anxiety or depression. So while all the things that you said are true, when we have high achievers, it's a little bit different to notice. And so we've got two examples here of two high achieving celebrities that talk about their mental health. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to change this view. Okay. So here we've got Serena Williams, who is a tennis player. And I'm just going to read her quote here. This is after she talked about, herself, her mental health after motherhood. And she said, "I just was in a funk. Mostly, I felt like I was not a good mom. I read several articles that said postpartum emotions can last up to 3 years if not dealt with. And I like communication best. Talking things through with my sisters, my friends, let me know that my feelings are totally normal. It's normal to feel like I'm not doing enough for my baby." Right? So this is an example of depression that a lot of people who give birth experience. Almost everyone who experiences, who gives birth will experience postpartum depression, at least for a short period of time, if not for a long duration. And so depression is something that a lot of us deal with. It is not uncommon. In fact, it is one of the most common mental health issues that we see. And so it's important for us to recognize and normalize that. Even someone as successful as Serena Williams does experience depression. Now, on the next slide, this is Lana Condor, who maybe you haven't seen before, but she's a very popular actress with teenagers right now. And she says, speaking on her anxiety, she says, "You can get nervous and be like, oh my God, somebody's not going to like me. I'm going to say something that's wrong. I'm going to do something that's wrong. I'm afraid someone's going to look at me funny, or they don't think my life is cool." And then I realize it's anxiety. And I think it's something we all go through, right? So here she's really walking us through her thought process. Anxiety doesn't always look like, you're worrying on the outside. Sometimes it's, just a lot of thoughts that are running through your mind. And that is the overthinking that we don't get to see often as people who are just observing people, right? So Lana Condor is someone who a lot of, especially young folks, see as really successful, but even she has these moments of overthinking, of really being stressed by all of these thoughts that are making her really self-conscious about herself. Now, before we move on, I did want to take a second to introduce Alicia Kim, who has joined us. So Alicia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name's Alicia. I'm a clinician therapist with our prevention and early intervention program at OCAPICA. I'm just coming from another positive parenting workshop, so happy to join you all.
Thanks, Alicia. Alicia's here to help support in the chat and answer some questions, as well as go over how to support your student. But now we've talked about some successful people. And so first we want to outline what are some signs of anxiety and signs of depression. So we're starting here with anxiety. You can see in this meme on the bottom here, anxiety just comes up, right? It's bothering here. It just says, hey, it's me again. And then you just have to say like, please stop or don't come, right? And that's how anxiety often feels for a lot of people who experience it, right? It's not that people who are living with anxiety, want to overthink or intentionally overthink. It's that these thoughts, they just come up and it creates these feelings of being on edge. A lot of you mentioned in the chat before, it may manifest as students being really irritable. They might seem really nervous and you don't know why, right? Maybe they're acting really shy and you want them to, start speaking up. You want them to, put themselves out there. But because of their anxiety, it's really difficult for them, right? It's not that they want to act this way, but it's that those thoughts are often making it hard for them to come out of their shell. Anxiety often feels like a sense of impending doom or danger. So they may feel like there's always something that is going to, catch them, something that is going to, trip them up and make them make a lot of mistakes. So that is often a sign of anxiety. You have your, physical responses to anxiety too. So if someone often has an elevated heart rate, if they're breathing rapidly, if they're always sweating or trembling, or if they're also feeling fatigued and tired, these are physical signs of anxiety. So maybe if you've seen your student exhibit any of these, and they're not playing a sport, they're not doing anything that would normally have you sweating and really have your heart rate up, maybe it's time to pay attention to, okay, maybe something's going on internally that is causing them a lot of, physical stress, and that might be anxiety. And other things to watch out for, and this is especially true for students, is when we have anxiety, a lot of people experience difficulty concentrating and trouble sleeping. So, right, we have teenagers at these schools. Difficulty sleeping is also something that a lot of them are going to have because it's really challenging and they're also, maybe staying up on their phones. And so it's a little bit difficult to monitor this. But if you notice that your student has trouble even getting to sleep all of the time, if they're constantly, thinking about 30 different things, and so it's hard for them to concentrate on what you're saying, this may be a sign of anxiety as well. And then finally, another sign of anxiety is a strong desire to avoid stress or anxiety triggers. So maybe you have someone who is always saying, no, I don't want to go because, I just don't want to go. And they're constantly staying at the house. Maybe they're rejecting all of their social outings. This may be because they have that desire to avoid things that are, putting them in situations where they may overthink, where they may be triggered into being really self-conscious about what's going on, how people see them. And that is often a sign of anxiety as well. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about signs of depression. So here we have a meme of Cookie Monster. One does not simply eat one cookie, because one big sign of depression is when we have weight gain or loss. And that typically comes from over or underindulging in different foods. That's a huge, huge sign of anxiety. So noticing, what's the baseline? What does your student typically eat? And then, taking moments to see, are they not eating everything that's on their plate? Is that concerning, or is it, just a little bit of things on there? Maybe they don't like a particular dish. Or on the other hand, maybe all the snacks in your house are going missing all the time really quickly. That can be a sign of your student dealing with a lot of stress and overindulging in food as a way to cope. And that's a huge, huge physical sign of depression. Other ones, much like anxiety, can have other physical signs. So disruptions in sleeping and eating patterns, like we just mentioned for eating, and then sleeping, either oversleeping, sleeping for the whole day, having no energy, or people who are not able to sleep at all. And so really paying attention to, what does my student normally do? And then is this a change in their normal pattern? There's also unexplained physical pains and aches, and that's often because depression does relate to our hormones. And so maybe we're having those phantom aches and pains. Maybe we're having, hormone deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies if we're not going outside. These are things that may come up if your student does have depression. And so maybe you're going to your physician to get things checked out, and your physician says, hey, there's nothing wrong. And maybe it's time to look into our mental health to see, okay, is that the cause for these aches and pains? Other things are persistent feelings of sadness, like a lot of you mentioned in our chat box earlier. Feelings of emptiness, helplessness, worthlessness, or guilt are all feelings that people who are living with anxiety experience. So it's really important to note, how are they speaking? Are they speaking hopeful about the future? Are they constantly putting themselves down? Do they feel, do they often say like, oh, there's no point, or, oh, like, why should I work on myself, right? These are signs that somebody may be dealing with depression. Other things are loss of interest in previously fun activities, right? Maybe you have an athlete and suddenly they don't want to go to practice. Or maybe you have an artist as a student and suddenly they're not creating art. They're not writing anymore. They're not painting anymore. And while it's normal to have a lull in, interest, if it's going on for a long period of time or they're avoiding what used to make things, happy for them, then that can be a sign of depression. Social isolation, just like anxiety, is a really big one. Self-loathing, which can include, how they talk about themselves, and self-destructive tendencies can also be a really big sign of depression, right? So maybe they're never cleaning their room. Maybe they don't see themselves as deserving of, clean space or comfortable space. That can be a really big sign to take notice of as well. And then finally, much like anxiety, low energy and fatigue and difficulty concentrating are also signs. And that's because depression and anxiety are really stressful things that take up a lot of brain power. And so they're not going to have the capacity to do, to focus or to really be energized throughout the day. So we talked about these signs, but how do we know that a high achiever is struggling with mental health? So for the sake of time, I'm going to actually skip that as a chat question. I'm going to just go into what these signs are. And so, like we mentioned, the signs for high achievers can be hard to notice, right? They might be sad, they may be fatigued, but they're not going to want to show it to you. And that's because anxiety and depression can actually act as motivators for people to do well. So things like completing tasks or succeeding in everyday life may be the things that high achievers really rely on to keep a sense of routine, or what we call like normal. It keeps them from falling apart, right? They know that they have a routine, and so they're going to stick to it as much as possible to make sure that, okay, maybe I'm really, really sad. Maybe, I really hate myself, but at least this routine will get me through the day. And so when they're very, very concentrated on that routine, that normal, that can actually be a concerning sign, right? It's not just responsibility, it's actually stress about how people will perceive them and how they need to stick to that routine, in order to prevent other people from noticing what's wrong with them. Completing tasks and succeeding also gives them validation, right? So this is something that's really important to talk about as their parents. So maybe they think, I have to succeed so that people will love me. I have to do really well in everything that I achieve because I want to make sure other people think I'm likable. I want to make sure other people think that I'm caring, right? And these, validations can be really important, right? It's important for us to recognize good things about each other. But it can also be damaging, right? Because if they're constantly worried about that external validation, they might be overworking themselves and really stressed and have all of that anxiety about how people perceive them. And that can be, again, a sign of a high achiever with anxiety. So if you go into our middle column here, this is where we can see why people have hidden, signs. And that's because, like we mentioned, anxiety can be a really strong motivation, right? Getting your work done on time, doing it perfectly, really exceeding expectations in your classes. that can be a really strong motivation for seeming normal, seeming exceptional, right? Getting that validation and also seeming like you have your stuff together. Um, we also may, not notice things about high achievers because we may dismiss their moodiness as, a phase or them being hormonal because we have teenagers, right? And sometimes that's true, right? There is irritability for this age group, but if it's constant and it happens for long periods of time, then these are things that are actually very concerning, right? Um, and so, excuse me. And so we want to make sure that we're not just dismissing things and instead really taking note of how often it happens, when it happens, right? And then the last thing is, high achievers might be really good at masking so that masking, which is when they are, really covering up what their anxiety and depression look like because they want to avoid questions, right? They want to avoid people noticing their anxiety, asking questions, which may put them in states where they're being questioned and therefore they may, um, have anxious responses to that. Or they don't want people to know they're sad, right? They don't want people to know they're dealing with depression. And so they'll, put their best face on outside. And it's really difficult to know that if you're not asking questions. Now, finally, here are some other indications that somebody may be living with anxiety or depression. So really excessive worry or guilt over past or future mistakes, right? If they're really, really overthinking something they've already done or really overthinking a situation that they're going into, that can be a really big sign of someone living with anxiety. We mentioned before overindulging in food, but also taking note of if your student is also overindulging in alcohol or other illicit substances is a really big sign, right? So, you know, if your student is someone who participates in these things, if there is a dramatic increase in their use of of alcohol or illicit substances, that may be a coping mechanism that they are trying to use to avoid thinking about anxiety or depression. And so it's really important to take note of how much, if your child is using, they are using. Inability to slow down or experience real joy is a really, really big sign of anxiety or depression. And that's because they're often, not in the moment. They're thinking about the past, thinking about the future, thinking about how people see them, thinking about all these different things that make it hard for them to sit in the moment and experience, joyful things that are happening around them. And so if they're not able to quote unquote like chill out, if they're not able to laugh with you or be with the family in a way that feels like they're really part of the group, maybe that's something worth noticing. And then finally, we mentioned that people who are living with anxiety or depression may really cling to a normal routine, right? And so if they're really rigid about their routines, if they get upset when something surprises them or when the routine gets interrupted, and this is not, just a one-time thing, but something that they're constantly worried about. So they may get upset if you try to say, oh, forget your plans, study another day, let's just get dinner instead. And they may get really upset about that all the time. That actually could be a sign that they are living with anxiety or depression as well. Now, this is a picture that shows you exactly what high functioning anxiety looks like, right? So on the on the left side, we've got somebody who looks like they're high achieving, looks really organized, looks really calm, right? And we're looking at the person in the suit here on the right side of the picture, on the left side of the picture, he's on the right side. And so it looks positive, right? But on the other side, we see what's going on in his brain, right? We see that he's overthinking. Is his hand sweaty? Maybe he's thinking, oh, do I smell, right? All these different things are going through his brain. He looks like he's in need of reassurance for people to confirm these thoughts. And then others may see him as really difficult to read, right? So maybe he looks expressionless. Maybe he is not sharing his thoughts. And so other people are going to see that as, oh, this person is just really hard to understand, really hard to read. That's a sign too, because that may indicate that they're trying not to let thoughts show on their faces, so that they don't have, people questioning them. And so this is a good picture to indicate, high functioning anxiety is not always obvious. Sorry if you can hear the phone in the background, but high functioning anxiety doesn't look like anything in particular. It's more noticing the patterns and noticing people's behaviors. And so we really want to encourage you to really take time to know your student. And so in the chat box, we wanted to ask, how has your student brought up stress, anxiety, or other mental health needs at home? What are some things that they may have said? Maybe they're concerned about homework, maybe friendships. What are some things that your student has told you? And you can put it in the chat box, and I'll wait maybe a minute or two for that.
I see someone in the chat mentioned that the students may talk about their friends going to therapy. So definitely, I think there are a lot of young people who are asked to meet with a therapist. So maybe seeking out those professional resources and needing that assistance, that extra support.
See Stacy Bauer in the chat also says, my daughter pulls me aside and explains things that are bothering her, including negative thoughts, bad dreams, tells me when she needs to talk. First of all, that's fantastic. I'm glad that she has that trusting relationship with you and tells you those things. And so I'm really happy that you have that relationship. But yeah, these are incredible signs, right? Having those negative thoughts, talking about bad dreams, these are really good indications that the student is dealing with something. All right. You first.
Oh, yes. And I was going to share, like a lot of the high school students that I've been working with, have mentioned challenges with sleep. So, sleeping too much or not being able to sleep at all, maybe being on, social media a lot more than they had been in the past, feeling really overwhelmed or just feeling really behind in school because they're having a difficult transition back into in-person learning. See somebody else here wrote, expresses concern that she doesn't spend enough time with friends, especially her best friend. Yeah, absolutely, right? So a lot of our kiddos did not have those normal times of socialization due to COVID, right? There was almost a year and a half of that. So they may be experiencing some social isolation or feelings of loneliness. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that one.
Yeah, and I was going to also bring up, you may hear this in jokes that your student is telling, right? Maybe they're constantly telling self-deprecating jokes. Maybe all of their humor seems really dark, or maybe they seem really obsessed with really dark media. It's not bad to like, poets that talk about depression. Maybe they're really into that. But if that's all that they're consuming all the time, then maybe that's a sign that they're bringing up, hey, I'm also dealing with these things, right? So really question that. I know that was something that a lot of the students that I've worked with have mentioned. They constantly say jokes like KMS or kill myself is what that stands for, or have memes that are about how nobody understands them, right? And these are signs. I also see can't talk to teachers, doesn't know how, doesn't want to tutor, right? Yeah, so not being able to access help, but also not wanting to reach out for help, that can be a sign that your student is dealing with something. And so if they bring that up, then, really questioning them on why they feel like they can't approach their a teacher or a tutor can help us get to the root of that question. All right. And so I think I'm going to talk about this one, which is talking a little bit about mental health stigmas. So if you're not familiar with the word stigma, it is basically a cultural or social idea that we have that kind of negatively talks about something. So mental health stigmas may be things like, cultural ones might be they're someone who's dealing with mental health or has depression is just lazy. Maybe they're not trying hard enough to be happy or to be successful. Um, if we have men in our homes, it might be that they're not being manly enough, right? They're not hiding their emotions. They're not, being strong and manly. Um, and these are cultural stigmas that make it difficult for us to talk about mental health, right? Because what we're doing instead is looking at those indicators of mental health and or a mental health struggle, and instead assigning these, you know, moral values of being lazy or being manly to them. Um, Also, things like saying somebody who has depression or anxiety brings shame to the family or trying to hide it by not talking about it. Both of those do the same thing of making the person feel like they can't talk about what is going on in their life and what they need. So, some societal stigmas that come from those cultural stigmas are things like successful people don't have mental health issues, right? Because they have everything going for them, they have everything together, they're always doing, perfect work. And the reality is that, like we talked about before, successful people often are motivated by a feeling of anxiety and wanting to hide what's going on with them. And then finally, another societal stigma that we have is you can't be successful if you're depressed or anxious, right? Um, and with Serena Williams and Lana Condor, we have two examples of people who are really successful despite and maybe um, with the motivations of their anxiety or depression. And so having anxiety or depression doesn't mean that you can't be successful or that you can't achieve things. It may make it more difficult to for some people who lose all motivation or who are not able to meet deadlines and things like that because of their mental illnesses. But for other people, they are still able to live with and still succeed while living with anxiety or depression. And so it's really important for us to note that success has nothing to do with whatever diagnosis someone has or whatever feelings somebody may have within their life. And we can see stigma in the way here that physical and mental illness are discussed. So on the top right, when we are talking about physical illness and we say, hey, I'm not feeling well, my stomach hurts, somebody will typically say, hey, go home. Hey, take care of your body, right? We've seen that a lot with COVID, right? We're really concerned. Oh, you have a fever. Oh, you're really sleepy. Go home, take a break. But often when we talk about mental illness, that's not the case, right? If somebody says, I'm not feeling well today, I'm really sad, I just don't really have any motivation, maybe a lot of times our response is, oh, that sucks. Everyone has those days. Don't worry about it, right? And what that does is that actually dismisses their emotions. While it may be true that a lot of people do have off days, someone expressing that they're not feeling well is not an invitation to say, oh, everyone has those days. Instead, what we want to encourage you to do is say, okay, do you need a break, right? Do you need to rest? The same things that you would tell someone with a physical illness, we want you to also apply to someone who has a mental illness as well. Now, with that, I'm going to talk about what self-care is. So self-care is something that allows us to take care of basic mental, physical, and emotional needs. So self-care looks different for all different people. And so while I'm going to go over some of the things in this list, it's not going to be, an end all be all. Some self-care activities aren't going to be here. The reason we're going over self-care is because we want to make sure that you can encourage your student to practice self-care. And also, we invite you to do self-care activities with them. The more you're able to incorporate self-care into your work together or your lives together, the more it makes it easier for them to incorporate self-care into their own life individually. So again, self-care is not one size fits all. So here are just some examples, right? Listening to music, maybe creating a playlist together of songs that make you happy as a family so that they can rely on that. Maybe they're feeling sad, they can turn to that playlist and it will remind them of, people who love them and also give them those feelings of happiness. Taking photos, creating art, doing anything creative is really something that is a self-care activity. When we access that creative part of ourselves, we actually do emotional release. And so anything that is creative, whether that's dancing, um, whether that's painting, that can be a self-care activity. And if you want to incorporate that into, doing it together as a family, maybe learn a TikTok dance with them if that's something they're doing. Maybe do a paint night together as a whole family, or maybe just you and that student, so that they know they have support and that they can turn to these activities. I'm going to go through some other ones, but cooking and eating a comforting meal, knowing what their favorite meals are, making those things when you notice that maybe they're really stressed out or maybe they've been feeling really down lately, is one way for you to incorporate self-care into their routine, right? If you take the moment to notice it, then you can actually be proactive about making sure that they have those self-care activities. Things like video chatting with friends, talking to a therapist are also great self-care activities. Putting yourselves in a community of people who support and care about you is a great one. And so maybe know who they rely on, or reach out to therapists for them and then talk to them about, hey, this is something that I think would be a great activity for you to do, to talk to a therapist. I want to support you through it. Is it something you're interested in, right? And so those can be really great examples of self-care that you incorporate yourself into, so that they have an encouraging person who's supporting them in doing self-care activities. Now, we also recognize that we want to make sure you're caring for yourself too. And so it's really, really difficult to talk to someone who doesn't want to be talked to about their mental health. You may have experienced this, but your child may have refused to talk to you or ignored you. They may have gotten upset or irritable when you ask about their day or when you ask about, what's on their mind. And they may have actually said some hurtful things in response to you too. And we want to just acknowledge that it's really hard to deal with those things, right? It's really difficult to know that someone you care about is lashing out on you. And so it's really important that as you are taking care of your child, you're also taking care of yourself and communicating that with your student. So an example of that would be putting space between you and your child. Maybe they said something really hurtful to you. We really want to encourage you to say things like, I think we should both cool off right now. I think our emotions are at a high level, and it's hard for us to respect each other right now, right? And so put that space, because that's caring. That is putting a boundary between your emotions, their emotions, and making sure that they know, okay, we can come back and talk, but I want to respect where we're both at. Something that we really don't want you to say is things like, I can't deal with you right now, or I can't deal with this. That can actually be really damaging to the student, right? Because it's saying that their emotions are something that you don't want to deal with, right? That is something negative that you shouldn't have to live with. And so that actually may deter them. Try not to personalize their responses. Maybe if they say something hurtful, you know, have that moment to feel, all the emotions that come with that. But the other side of it is try not to take that personally, right? Try to say, okay, I know they said something hurtful, but I also know they're going through something. And so I'm going to, maybe address that in the future. But it's not actually about me, it's about what's going on with them. And recognizing that can be a really powerful way of not getting hurt by the things that they may say to you. Turning to other resources for support is also great, and we're going to talk about some of those as well. And then doing our own self-care activities is really important too. So as much as you incorporate those, your student self-care into your routine, make sure you're focusing on yours as well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alicia to talk about how to support your child who is living with anxiety or depression.
Great, thanks, Nikki. So, like Nikki has shared, self-care is so important for all of us during this time, especially as we experience the long-term effects of kind of living in this pandemic world. So, you as a parent can also model to your child what healthy stress management looks like, right? We may have unhealthy, activities that we use to cope and manage stress, which is totally understandable, right? Maybe like eating our favorite snacks, or maybe overindulging in those things, right? Um, but there's also healthy ways that we can kind of process what we're going through. So work with your child to connect with themselves and practice self-care. Maybe talk to them. What activities feel good for you, right? What do you look forward to doing? What are some routines maybe before bed or in the morning that can help you feel prepared for the day or prepared to go to bed? Assure your child that you care about them regardless of what they do or don't do or achieve. This can help reduce anxiety, right? As I'm sure many of us have felt, being in high school, there's so many pressures, academic pressures, social pressures, extracurriculars, and we can begin to feel that our performance on those things actually determines our self-worth. So to have, a supportive parent, supportive adult figure say, no matter what you achieve, I still love you, you're doing a good job, can be very alleviating for that stress. Help them connect with someone they trust and care about. Sometimes, maybe it's hard to talk to parents, right, about things that are going on. Maybe academic pressure, it's just really tough to talk about with a parent so making sure that you encourage your child to speak to somebody else that might be able to kind of engage with them further about those topics. Maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a counselor, maybe it's a religious figure, a coach, right? Anybody where they could have that healthy outlet to talk about what's going on. And then, of course, checking out community support and professional resources in your area. We have noticed that, even as another parent kind of mentioned, that there is an increased need for professional support. And that's only natural considering, all of the mental health difficulties we've been dealing with, all the stressors of the pandemic, worrying about our loved ones, maybe even worrying about finances, right? It's only natural that we've begun to experience the long-term effects of these things. So checking out the resources that might be available to you. Okay. And so here we have some information about talking to your teen about mental health. So you might be curious, how do I even start this conversation with my teen, right? So we have some tips for you here. So one of the first tips is expressing curiosity about what's going on, right? Maybe, like we notice some grades are dropping or some things are going on, right, that we don't approve of. Right, but kind of engaging in with your teen and talking in a neutral or curious approach about any changes in behavior, right? Kind of like what Nikki mentioned earlier, just kind of noticing, hey, I've been noticing that you've been withdrawing more. You haven't been spending time with friends. What's going on there, right? Kind of approaching it and having an open-ended question so that they're able to feel open to share what they feel comfortable with. Second tip here is empathize about current challenges they might be experiencing. So, a lot of my teens are, having a hard time right now, actually even doing a stress management group at Cypress High School. And so a lot of my students are talking about feeling that lack of motivation, just feeling overwhelmed by things like college and their extracurricular activities, having all of these classes. I think one of my students mentioned that, before, um, last year, while they were doing virtual school, they were in school for 3 hours a day, right? And the rest of the time they had free time or time to do homework, right? And so coming back to school full time, right? Having a full course load, all of your extracurricular activities, that can be a huge and difficult transition. So acknowledging those are the things that are going on, right? And also like there are many losses for our students, right? Our school age youth, right? So, missing birthdays, missing graduations, maybe not having been able to say goodbye to peers from their previous grade or teachers, things like that, and just acknowledging the difficulty of those things. And the last tip we have is keeping a continuous dialogue. So, like Nikki mentioned, maybe the first time, it's not a good time. They don't want to talk about what's going on, or they're feeling really sensitive about, grades dropping. They're aware of these things and they're just not feeling open to talk about it. at the moment. Reassure them that they can talk to you at any time, right? And that it's an open conversation. It's not one and done, right? And I like what we've written here of just creating an open invitation for when they are willing and able to have that conversation with you. And then another tip here is just maintain calm, right? Even if they share information that you don't approve of, right? Maybe there's something going on, some coping skill that they're using, that you don't approve of, right? Trying as much as possible to maintain a neutral reaction, right? So that you can kind of get to the root of what's going on. A lot of times when we see changes in behavior or even acting out or risky behaviors, they're often a sign of something that's going on deeper. So we want to kind of hear as much out from our youth, right, to be able to explore what deeper issues are going on. Okay, and we just have a little bit of a script here, right, going along with those tips that we just gave, right? So this is just a model, right, and you could definitely change it to what might work for your child. But starting the conversation may look like expressing curiosity, saying, hey, I've noticed a change in your sleeping patterns, right? Notice that you've been waking up in the middle of the night, right? I've noticed you've been on social media a lot, right? I'm worried about you. Can we talk more about it? Right? Coming from a place of concern, right? Understanding that a lot of those changes in behaviors could be mental health related, right? And so starting the conversation in that way. Empathizing again with the current challenges. So, sharing a lot of students are struggling with, COVID fatigue, right? How are these things affecting you, right? So again, really empathizing with the challenges that they might be experiencing and normalizing them, right? Sometimes it's just helpful to know you're not the only one, right? A lot of students are struggling with this right now. And then, this last little part of the script. So, keeping a continuous dialogue, maybe if now's not the right time, I'm always here to listen or chat if you want to talk more about blank. I love you and I'm here for you when you need, right? And kind of putting the ball in their court, right? And so that they can reach out to you when they're feeling comfortable or able to talk about things. Okay. And a couple of more tips that we just, kind of compiled here towards the end, but more tips for parents modeling positive coping skills and self-care, right? So, parents play such a big role in, what, our children and youth kind of see and model behavior after. So if you can be a really good model of self-care and engaging in healthy stress management activities, that can be a really helpful model for your child to do the same. So, some of the tips we have here is avoid talking about harmful coping. So, substance use or alcohol use. But, an example here we see is, you might say to your child, when I'm stressed, you might see me clean the house or go to the gym, right? And just modeling those positive stress management skills. Take notice on how your child copes, right? Just noticing what helps them cheer up, right? Who are friends that they enjoy talking to or can, kind of talk about things that are stressful with, right? What routines make them feel safe or supported, right? Just noticing, those things that are helpful to your child and maybe giving them small, gentle encouragements to engage in those things, right? Say like, hey, I know that this friend is really helpful to talk to when you're feeling overwhelmed about school. What about reaching out? Right? Okay, and the last one here is getting educated on youth mental health. So, all of our parents who are here today, you're doing a wonderful job of, finding and looking out for extra supports for, and extra resources to support your child. So thanks for being here. You can also learn, who are the appropriate supports for your child at school? Is there a school counselor, right? Can you talk to the teacher about challenges that are going on, right? And finding those supportive figures in the school or even extracurricular settings. Learn more about local community resources. So we're from a community-based organization and we provide free short-term counseling, right? For any kind of insurance status. So maybe it is time that you need to seek out professional help, right? Or maybe it is time to seek out some other community supports or resources. So, looking into those things and, connecting with the schools and other places that can provide that support. Okay, so we have a couple of additional community resources for you. So we have OC Links, which is a 24-hour warm line through the Orange County Healthcare Agency, and they can connect you to any kind of mental health, behavioral health services that are available in the community, free services, services based on your insurance. So this is a great resource, or if you're just looking for support. This is a wonderful resource to reach out to. Contacting your insurance provider to look into, what kind of mental health coverage is provided by your insurance, right? What kind of benefits are covered and what kind of resources are available through that provider. And then we have the OC Mental Health Plan Access Line. So again, a 24-hour a phone number here. They accept Medi-Cal insurance and they do non-emergency screenings and referrals for specialty mental health services and or substance use services. So these are great resources. And then the Orange County Healthcare Agency, we're funded by them, which allows us to provide our services for free. They're kind of the county leader on mental health services for Orange County. And then NAMI Orange County, great resource. I believe they also have a warm line. So, these are resources that you can even use for yourself as a parent if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you yourself need extra support or professional help. These are some great resources to tap into. I think we mentioned the warm line, but there's also a teen line, a teen warm line. So if you ever find that your teen needs someone to talk to, but they don't have someone, right? There's this line that's available 6 to 10 p.m. every day. And there are peer supports and again, referrals to services and organizations in the community. Some additional hotline numbers. This is for if you're in a state of crisis, if, again, I think we've covered in some of our other presentations, but if there's ever kind of any danger that your child will is going to harm themselves or harm somebody else, these are times when we want to seek out more intensive supports. So of course, in any kind of emergency, you want to call 911, but we also have the OC Crisis Prevention Hotline, which can help with particularly mental health or behavioral health related crises. There's also a text line available. And then the California Youth Crisis Line available as well. Okay, thank you all for your time this morning. Please feel free to, drop any questions in the chat or take yourself off mute and go ahead and provide any comments or questions that you might have.